I think he's the best option, but I don't know that he's the best option at that price. All right, Mike Sielski, Philly.com. Is Sam Bradford the right option? Happy New Year to you. How you doing, Mike?
Glad to finally talk to you guys.
All right, obviously the Eagles are in a really weird situation here where they need to hire a coach. They don't have a quarterback in place to really entice that coach. But is it fair to say that they should make every effort to get that quarterback signed to kind of use him in the pitch?
Yeah, I mean, I think short of some kind of unforeseen trade in which, similar to what Chip Kelly did last year to acquire Sam Bradford, which really nobody saw coming, I don't see the better option at quarterback other than bringing Bradford back. Now, the question becomes, at that point, if you're Jeffrey Lurie and you're Howie Roseman and you're Tom Donahoe, what are the conditions you set for hiring a head coach? Do you say to this guy, look, you have to bring Bradford back. That is a condition of your hiring. We want Sam back. We want the continuity, and we want him back. Therefore, you have to take him as your quarterback. Or are you going to allow the guy to hire his own? Do you set up a timetable, a deadline by which, okay, you get a year with Bradford based on the franchise tag? It's a really tricky situation here. What I wrote basically is that it's right for the Eagles. If the Eagles want to bring him back, that's fine with me because I think he earned that in the second half of the season. There's a lot of discussion about how good is he really and what does his career say over its totality. I'm a big believer in circumstance, and I think that the circumstances for Bradford finally got good in the second half of the year. He got to know the offense a little bit. He felt totally healthy and comfortable coming off of 2 years away from football, and it showed in the way he played and in the statistics he put up. And don't forget, guys, the Eagles were a winning team this year in all the games that Sam Bradford started and finished. They were 7-6. So that has to say something. I'm not sure what exactly the best metric is, but there are a number of them out there, and they lead me to believe that Sam Bradford can be a pretty good quarterback for the Eagles.
The numbers were okay. They didn't knock you off the page. 65% pretty good, including when you factor in all the drops they had, Mike. Is this opinion based on performance or the lack of options?
Both. I mean, that's the other – you're right to factor that in, Mike. I mean, franchise quarterbacks don't just grow on trees. And, we get into these discussions and we say, well, he's not Aaron Rodgers or he's not Tom Brady. Well, of course he isn't, but those guys aren't available. You're not trading for Tom Brady. You're not trading for Aaron Rodgers. You have to make the best with what you have. And the question to me is not whether is Sam Bradford a franchise quarterback right now. The question is, can he continue to grow and develop, and did he show the skills that suggest that if you put pieces around him with a smart head coach, can he succeed? And I think he can. I mean, I think there was a lot working against him in the second half of the season, and he played through it. I think, our impression of him is a bit colored by the fact that, there were a lot of other parts of the offense, from the play calling to the offensive line to the running backs to the wide receivers that weren't working so well. And as you guys mentioned, you may not want to pay $20 million for Sam Bradford, but that is the going rate. I mean, that's the franchise tag might even be a little pricier than that. So it's just the way of the world. I mean, it's the most important position in the NFL. If you can get away with not paying a guy a whole lot of money to be great there, the way the Seahawks did with Russell Wilson his first few years, then more power to you. Most teams can't, and the Eagles aren't in that position.
Yeah, Mike, you mentioned circumstance, and I agree with you that that's a big part of this. But as we look to move forward, to me, it looks like Sam is in the better circumstance and that he's the best option on the free agent market. And all of a sudden, if a team like Cleveland, for instance, opens the checkbook and goes a little bit higher, where does Howie Roseman come into this? Because by all accounts, this isn't a Howie Roseman move to bring him in. So could they move on from that standpoint, and the fact that the new and sort of old general manager is back in the saddle?
I don't know what factor Howie necessarily is. Jeffrey Lurie sure painted it the other day as if he believed this was a team with talent to win now, and that Chip Kelly's demeanor and Chip Kelly's way of doing things and just generally Chip Kelly was the reason that they went 7-9 and didn't perform as well as they should have, and clearly by firing him, Lurie's expectation was that they should have been better. Now, how much Roseman's whispering in Lurie's ear over the course of the year has to do with that, nobody really knows. I think we can all say for certain that there was that whispering going on. But you have to wonder if you're Bradford. You're right. Bradford, from a financial standpoint, is in the driver's seat. The question then becomes, okay, if we're going to stick with circumstance, what other circumstances are going to present themselves that outside of the Eagles that would be favorable to him? Does Pat Shurmur end up somewhere else? Is there another coach from his background that ends up with another team so that he's really accented his desire to not have to learn an entirely new system of offense? Now, he's probably going to have to do that anyway, so because of the new coach here, if he were to stay. But does the similar personnel, Jordan Matthews, Zach Ertz, DeMarco Murray, Ryan Matthews, does that mitigate it somewhat and make him think, okay, well, at least I'll have the same group of guys and we can make things work from that respect? You're right. There is no guarantee that Bradford's going to want to come back, but if you're the Eagles, you have to hope that the circumstances are acceptable enough for him here that he'd want to stay compared to starting fresh somewhere.
Mike, does a new coach, if Shurmur leaves, does that lessen the attractiveness of bringing Bradford back, in your opinion? I mean, is he attractive because of the familiarity with Shurmur? I mean, this would be his, fifth different offensive coordinator if they bring a new coach in, theoretically, if Shurmur leaves.
I think it would be more attractive for Bradford to stay if Shurmur were to stay. I don't know that Shurmur's going to stay, if only because Jeffrey Lurie has tended over time to favor offensive-minded head coaches. If you're going to hire a former defensive coordinator or more of an overseer kind of guy who lets the assistants under him do their thing, then maybe Shurmur can stay. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to that. But I don't know what Lurie is looking at in terms of, who he wants as a head coach. Is it Adam Gase? Is it Hugh Jackson? Is it somebody we're not even thinking of at this moment? So much of this, it's funny, I'm writing a column about this right now for tomorrow. So much of this comes down to good timing and perception and circumstance in all these head coaching searches. Look at Sean McDermott. Sean McDermott is a hot guy. He's a candidate now because of Carolina's success. But 4 or 5 years ago, he's not a hot guy. Even 2 years ago, he's not a hot guy. So, I don't know what Jeffrey Lurie's looking at. All we have is recent history to go on. But I have to think that you have a guy in Bradford who showed you what he could do in the second half of that. Once he's healthy and once things have kind of settled down for him, I would think that they wouldn't want to start all over again at that position. They've been doing it time and time again ever since they traded Donovan McNabb.
Talking with Mike Sielski, Sam Bradford and the Eagles on 97.3 ESPN. Mike, if you look at Pat Shurmur and say Jeffrey Lurie's first option is Adam Gase or Hugh Jackson, he's got somebody in mind, but it doesn't work out because they have other options. Is there a potential, because of Shurmur's history and the fact that Sam is on record saying he wants some continuity, is there a legitimate potential that at the end of the day they just take the interim tag off and give it to Pat Shurmur?
I think that's a possibility, yeah. I think the idea of closing our minds to any of these possibilities at the moment is foolish. Again, getting back to the question of circumstance, Pat Shurmur was a head coach in this league before for the organization and the franchise, which is probably the bottomest bottom feeder in the league right now, the Cleveland Browns. It's funny, like getting back to what this column I'm writing for tomorrow, and Sean McDermott. Compare Sean McDermott to Mike Pettin, who was an up-and-coming defensive coordinator with the Jets, went to Buffalo for a year, did pretty well there. His defense was fairly good, and got a head coaching opportunity and took it with the Browns because basically it's a no-lose situation. If you win in Cleveland, you can win anywhere. Well, they didn't win in Cleveland. They have a crazy owner. They have a quarterback who's wearing disguises and going to rehab and all kinds of stuff. And it doesn't work out for Mike Pettin there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Mike Pettin is a terrible NFL coach. And just because Pat Shurmur coached in Cleveland and, was on the staff while Chip Kelly ran the offense doesn't necessarily mean that Pat Shurmur can't be a decent head coach. Again, I think that gets back to timing, that gets back to circumstances, that gets back to perception. So is it possible that they interviewed him, he must be a candidate. What they said in that interview, I don't know, but I wouldn't rule it out completely.
Mike, if that type of situation, how big are politics? How big are selling it to this fan base? Because obviously that wouldn't be the most sexy pick for the Eagles fans. Is that too big of a hurdle to overcome?
I don't know that it necessarily is. It might have been after Andy Reid. It really might have been. When you've gotten 14 years out of a guy and you've gotten generally consistent excellence and it sort of peters out at the end for a lot of factors, you probably have to come back and make a big move at that point. And they get Chip Kelly and they make that big move. People were so disgusted with Chip, outside the franchise and inside the franchise by the time he left, that I don't necessarily think you have to do that. I'm not a big believer in making splashes with the fan base in signing players or hiring coaches. Andy Reid was a pretty good hire as a head coach, and as big as he is, he made virtually no splash at all when he fell in the water here in Philadelphia. I mean, who is this guy? Well, he turned out to be a pretty darn good head coach for a long time. So same thing with go outside football, say Charlie Manuel with the Phillies. I mean, remember how that hire went over initially. So if they think Shermer's the best guy, or they think Joe Brown is the best guy, or they think, Bob Anonymous is the best guy, then you hire who you think is the best guy.
Mike Sielski, Philly.com, and you're working on a piece tomorrow, as you mentioned, for head coaching candidates. Read his piece about Sam Bradford, showing that he belongs. And I agree that, look, Bradford probably did enough. To you, is Pat Shurmur the best candidate because of what he brings out of Sam Bradford? Does that defaultly make Shurmur almost the same reason? Because there's not a lot of great options out there, so you might as well just go with the one that's going to bring the most out of the guy that you want to bring back.
I wouldn't be – if they hired Shurmur, I would not go, oh, my God, that's a terrible hire. I really wouldn't. Now, having said that, I think one of the keys to being a really good head coach is bringing on really good assistant coaches and allowing them to delegate and, making good hires in that regard. I mean, go back to when Reid got here and look at the assistants he had. He had Jim Johnson. He had Ron Rivera. He had John Harbaugh. He had Brad Childress. Over time, he had Marty Morningweg. All of these guys either went on to become head coaches or had been head coaches in the past. And except for Jim Johnson, obviously, who was a terrific defensive coordinator. So, Andy did a terrific job of picking, his staff. And Shurmur would have to do something similar. I don't know how great Chip was at doing that. It was kind of the Chip Kelly show, and you're gonna kind of go along with what Chip wants. And I don't know how much autonomy each of these guys have, unless it was Deuce Staley, rolling the running backs, like Chip liked to say. So, we're going to have to see. But for that reason, Mike, I wouldn't be opposed to them bringing Shurmur back. I don't necessarily think that, because the guy gives a dry press conference, that makes him a bad head coach.
Well, and going kind of off of something that John asked with Roseman, how unattractive would the job be because you have to work with Roseman? It seems that has been mentioned that, hey, who wants to work with Howie Roseman? I mean, Chip, it seemed that was the downfall there. Those two guys couldn't get along. Andy, I guess, got some power from Howie at some point, and then that kind of seemed when Howie was taking over the draft that ended that whole situation. So does Howie, his role, be a big factor for both the coach and the quarterback?
Look, I don't know what it's like to work with Howie Roseman. I've never worked with him, okay? But if you look at the way the front office structure was set up over the last year, the idea that Jeff Lurie would hire Chip Kelly as a head coach, Kelly would ask for the power, and then Lurie would hedge his bet by keeping Roseman in some kind of position where he could kind of keep an eye on Chip, that would be the thing that would give me pause if I were a head coaching candidate. It's when push comes to shove, Roseman is never the guy who gets pushed or shoved. He's still there. So, that would give me pause. Is how much power am I really going to have? How much of, what Jeffrey tells me, he may be telling me X, he may be telling him, he may be telling Howie Y, Howie may be telling him something different. That's a relationship that, if you're a candidate, you got to look at it and go, okay, I really got to feel comfortable about how this is going to play out. And, the idea of working with Roseman, look, you're going to have to work with anybody who hires you. You have to make sure you get along, with your bosses. You probably, that happens in every walk of life. You don't necessarily get hired, by your friends or people you necessarily get along with real well. But the power structure within that front office where Jeffrey talks about it being collaborative and all these sorts of things, well, it's not totally collaborative. Howie tends to get what Howie wants.
Yeah, and that was a big word in Jeffrey's press conference, as you said, Mike. Where are you on the collaboration aspect? What works best in the NFL? Is it simply that Howie, because as you mentioned, if he was a hunter, he's got a lot of pelts in his cabin. It goes long before Chip Kelly, whether it's Tom Modrek, whether it's Jason Light, whether it's Ryan Grigson, Louis Riddick. There's a lot of guys who have gone up against Howie Roseman, and Howie Roseman is the one that stands.
Yeah, I think we sometimes make it too binary. Like, do you have one guy who has final say, or do you take a vote on everything and majority wins all the time? I think there's a way to be, a midpoint or a middle ground between them. And, you need somebody who's going to make a final decision, obviously. But you also need that person to be open to criticism. And there is such a thing as creative tension. There is something to be said for hashing something out and going back and forth about it tooth and nail, and having people in there in the room with you to help make a decision who have different ideas from you. And, I don't know. Again, I haven't worked with Howie Roseman. I don't know how much he takes those kinds of things under consideration, or whether he's just got his mind made up on everything and, he just pays lip service to the idea of taking opinions from, his other player personnel people or his head coach or anything like that. It's not so binary, I don't think. It's easy to just say, go get a Bill Parcells or somebody like that and let him make all the decisions. Well, good luck. Good luck finding a guy like that.
Yeah.
You have to have proved yourself over time to be that kind of guy, a Parcells, a Bill Poley, and somebody like that. And, like I said, good luck to the Eagles in trying to find that guy, because there aren't many of them out there.
Well, Mike, I got an interesting tweet here that suggested the problem. You mentioned circumstance and timing, and the tweet says the problem is when the coach you fired is actually the best available candidate among the guys you now are looking at. Is Chip Kelly a better option than all the other guys that are out there? Did they give up on him too soon? A winning record in the NFL. You don't see that from a lot of guys 3 years in that get fired.
Well, it's true. Look, I'm of the opinion that there are a lot of people out there who could be really good NFL head coaches in the right circumstances. I really do believe that. I don't think, the number of guys who are complete bumbling idiots who can't do the job under circumstances is relatively small. And so much of a team's ownership, its organization, and its players who are already here go into that. Look, the Cleveland Browns turned Bill Belichick into a total. And Belichick was still something of a noob at New England for a season and 2 games until Drew Bledsoe and Tom Brady became their quarterback. Okay? Saying that Bill Belichick isn't brilliant, it doesn't mean that he's not ticketed to the Hall of Fame and maybe the greatest NFL coach of all time. But it does mean he had something to do with that. It had a lot to do with it. Circumstances had a lot to do with it. So let's see. Is Chip Kelly, it's not going to work here. It didn't work here. Jeff Lurie doesn't want to work with him. Howie Roseman clearly doesn't want to work with him. The players apparently, to a certain degree, a certain number of them don't want to play for him. It didn't work. That's fine. Let's move on. I think Lurie made a mistake in firing Chip so soon. That doesn't absolve Chip from what happened this season. He didn't do a good job. But it is possible for coaches to learn and grow and develop over time. Tom Coughlin did it. Pete Carroll did it. Belichick did it. And now if Kelly's going to do it, he's not going to do it here. And, if I were Jeffrey Lurie, I would be praying every night that Chip Kelly loses every game he coaches in the NFL if he gets another job. Because, we're not talking about it now, but this has the potential to go really badly if the team hires Chip and he tweaks some things and figures some things out. Becomes a really good head coach.
Mike Sielski, columnist, Philly.com. Read that piece on Sam Bradford, and the one that he's working on the coaching should be really good as well. Always a great job, Mike. Happy New Year to you, pal. We'll see you in 2016 plenty more. Thanks, man.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.